Reboot Society, der Podcast über künstliche Intelligenz, Diversität und die neue Weltordnung mit Sarah Rojewski und Eken Paland.
All right. Thank you for answering our questions today.
I'm happy to be here.
We start with the first one. How will Notebook LM change the way of learning, teaching, and interacting?
Yeah, so many potential ways. I think part of it is just this idea that is, I think, in the air right now, which is I think, most exciting side of AI in education, which is this idea of kind of a personalized tutor. Notebook LM is just incredibly good at explaining and helping you understand whatever material you give it. And it's extremely good at adjusting its kind of level of complexity or sophistication based on where you are as a learner, right? So if you tell it, I'm in 10th grade, I'm just learning this material, please make sure it's comprehensible to me, it will just adjust kind of beautifully. And we have a new mode actually that we're just rolling out called Learning Guide. And Learning Guide is kind of a different chat mode. Instead of just giving you the answer, it helps you kind of think through and get to the answer yourself, which is a really fundamental kind of shift in the way that chatbots work. Gemini does this as well now. And so, for all the concerns that people have about AI in the classroom and people using it to write their essays and things like that, I think you always have to keep in mind that there's this other thing, which is now you have 24 hours a day, an expert tutor that will sit there and, focus exactly on your needs as a learner anytime you want it. And that, I think, that's pretty magical.
I think it's very interesting that we not think about how can we integrate AI in a current educational system, but how is it going to break it in a positive way and disrupt it, that we can get into this hyper-personalization tutor experience, which you described in the presentation, and that actually every child gets the support they're needed in different fields, because not all our brains are working in the same level and wired the same. And I saw that there are already schools in the US. Unfortunately, in Europe and Germany, we're a bit more restrictive with innovations in the school system. But I saw that in the US, there are already schools that actually apply this kind of learning method, that some kids are even 2 grades above in math, but still need some support on writing and reading, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity, and I hope that Europe.
Yeah.
And another way to think about it, I when I talk to educators about Notebook LM, I sometimes talk about it, this is what the student can do with a notebook, but it's also really helpful for the teachers. Huh. And so one example that I'm kind of fascinated with is when you create a lesson plan, right? Right now, when you create a lesson plan for your class, your syllabus, or whatever you're going to try and teach, you're kind of doing it for the whole class. Like, you're just taking the average kind of knowledge of the entire class, and you're like, okay, I think this is the most optimal way to teach this material for these 20 students based on my general sense of who they are. But it's one lesson plan, right? And that's hard. Like, it's hard to create one lesson plan. But what you can do right now in Notebook, it's not kind of a feature officially of the product, but you can do it, is create a source that is a description of all those 20 students and what they're interested in and where their knowledge, currently lies. And then have the material you're trying to study as another set of sources. And then you say to Notebook, create a lesson plan for each of these 20 students, customized to their interests and their needs.
Yeah.
And technically, you could have done that before as a teacher if you had a spare summer to prepare, right? But now Notebook will create a draft of that for you in literally maybe like 45 seconds. It could be a little bit longer if you used our report feature, which does a more detailed kind of document generation. But again, like some of the things we've talked about, it's probably 1,000 times faster to generate that document. And it's so much harder to do it the old way that no one would ever do it. And so now it creates these new ways of teaching that were just unthinkable before, that now are within the realm of possibility. But you have to be willing to embrace the tools. You have to learn how to use them. And that's something that's a choice you have to make.
Speaking of choice, and like instead of day 0, or that always the next day can be your day 1, basically, is for our audience that maybe do not have the time to explore all the AI tools at one go. If someone after listening to this podcast would want to start with Notebook LM tomorrow, what would be your hands-on tip? What were the first 2-3 steps? They have never seen it before. They are probably an expert in something. What would you tell them where to start, how to think when they open the application?
Yeah, so what I would do is think about your life and think about some project that you have in your life that involves a bunch of different documents of some form. And it could be a fun project, like one thing that people love to do with Notebook is Dungeons and Dragons. Like if you play a role-playing game, or let's say you're working on a business plan, and that project has the business plan plus a bunch of supporting documents plus your notes, whatever it is. Define that project, create a new notebook, call that project, and then the first thing you do is just load all the documents you have that are related to that project. Just put in 10 documents, 15 documents, whatever you have. And then just start asking questions. Maybe it's the first way to go. Just say like, hey, remind me of this, or summarize the key ideas here. Maybe just generate an audio overview and listen to the magic of a podcast about your novel that you're working on, or your D&D campaign, or whatever it is. So just play for a little bit, but make sure you've populated that notebook with a bunch of sources for something that you're working on that you know pretty well. And I think you'll just see right out of the gate how powerful it can be, and also how nuanced its understanding of the project and what you're working on and the information needs that you have, that you just get the second those sources have loaded.
Yes, and let's talk science communication. We had it a little bit earlier, but science is under pressure in this post-reality era we are in right now. How can Notebook LM help with science communication? How can we prepare information for a broader audience? And maybe you can explain a little bit your thoughts and the model and how it works.
So this is really important to me because this has been part of my kind of career mission in a way, but since before I came to Google. So I wrote a lot of books about science, and a lot of what I was trying to do is to explain to people why science is important, the value that it contributes to society. And when I wrote a whole book, actually the best-selling book of all my books was a book about the history of cholera and the cholera epidemic in 1854 in London, and how we solved the mystery of where cholera was coming from, which was a transformative thing in the history of cities. And so telling stories that make science accessible and make science meaningful to people is one of the most important things we can do right now. And that's something that, in a way, I hadn't thought about this when we started on this project, but it's become increasingly important to me. Notebook is a great tool for sharing information with the world and making information accessible to the world. So if you are a scientist and you're working in a field, and you're working at a very high level and you're doing important things, but the information is very complex, and to understand it, you really need to have a PhD in the field. Up until tools like Notebook came along, you could find a popular science writer who would write an article about your work and translate it into a kind of a layperson level of comprehension. But now you can publish that material as a notebook. We have these public notebooks that you can release to the world. Anybody with a link can go and read them. And with one click, you can make an engaging video overview that explains to an ordinary listener or viewer why your work is important. And I think having those tools, because there are a lot of brilliant scientists who are terrible at actually explaining their ideas to non-scientists, and it sometimes seems like the better a scientist you are, the worse your communication skills are, because you're so in your own head and so I think, the flexibility of the Notebook LM platform, where if you bundle up your research in a notebook, other experts can use it and explore your ideas and dive into your research in all of its complexity. But that, high school student who was just curious, they can also get access to the material because Notebook is such a good transformer of knowledge into whatever format you want.
Nice. I have one last very quick question. Is that nowadays the buzzword the last couple of months was AI slop? Because people are just, we talked about this in the conversation as well, like trying to like skip steps and like just hand in something that was like not correct or anything. But the way you're presenting it, and this is your life story basically, is like you were merging with the technology and always embracing it for your own creativity, for your thinking process, for the critical minds out there, because we still have a lot of people that are not on board what is happening with AI, and we also want to talk to these people, take them seriously. What are like the 2-3 sentences and thoughts that you would give them of saying this is making us as humans even better? It's not replacing us, it's like the way how we use it. What would you tell them from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the whole architecture of Notebook LM is designed to foreground the human-authored original text that you're working with, right? We spent a lot of time creating that whole left-hand source panel so that you can read the original documents. You have citations that take you back to the original documents. And so it's not AI replaces human-authored knowledge. It is AI becomes a guide to human-authored knowledge. And that is, that's just a foundational idea for the product. The other thing that, there are a bunch of problems that I think AI has, and Notebook has had some of this as a problem in the past, that some of the critics, I think, assume that there's something intrinsic to AI that causes this problem rather than something that we can actually fix. And so one example of this, it's kind of related to slop, is the sycophancy problem, which is like the AI always loving your ideas, and just being like, Stephen, that was fantastic, a brilliant idea. And like, that is not, in the long run, helpful. I mean, sometimes it's nice to get a little hype and people get that out of their AI thought partners, but you also want to have some tough love and you want to have a critic who's capable of saying that's a bad idea, Stephen. And so in the first round of audio overviews, the hosts, the kind of instructions for the hosts were for them to be pretty enthusiastic about whatever you gave them. And we kind of noticed that was great in some cases, but sometimes you wanted a little more tough love in a way. And so we introduced a couple of new modes, one of which is called debate, which is actually the most interesting one. But another one is called critic. And it's basically the hosts have been instructed to offer constructive criticism based on what you give them. And so when you're trying to really refine your ideas, you can choose that mode and you won't get a hostile response, hopefully. But you will get someone nudging you to kind of improve your thinking or improve your argument in this way. And so it's an example of, yes, the first rounds of models were a little bit too positive and enthusiastic, but that's not something intrinsic to AI. That's just a choice that we made in the way that we tuned them. And now we can tune them to be slightly more critical.
Nice. Thank you for your time on your world tour. Thank you for your time.
Thank you
so much.
Great chatting.